Coffee with Coker, a healthcare business podcast published by the Coker Group. I'm your host, Mark Reibelt, and this is one of our shorter Espresso shot episodes, and today we're talking about the recent rule release from CMS announcing changes to the Physician Fee Schedule and overall reimbursement trends for 2019. Joining me today is a senior vice president here at Coker, Brandt Jewell, and a vice president here at Coker, Alex Kirkland. And they just spent a few minutes talking with me, providing their input on these changes and some of the things we can expect based on what we know now. It was actually a really good conversation because we had a chance to talk a little bit more about kind of what this means specifically related to the recent changes from CMS, but also just the changes, some of the other changes I guess maybe we can expect or anticipate coming up in the new year here, 2019. So it was a very good discussion. Hope you all enjoy it. If you have any questions about it, we will make sure contact information for both Brandt and Alex is provided in the show notes. You can always find more information about anything we talk in these episodes or listen to past episodes. You can find us at coffeewithcoker.com. And as always, we enjoy getting your feedback, whether it's just comments on any of the previous shows, or if you have questions or requests for topics that you'd like to hear more about on a future episode, please reach out to us. You can contact us at feedback@cokergroup.com. You can also reach out to us on social media. You can find us on Twitter at Coker Group. You can find us on LinkedIn. Again, you can find us at coffeewithcoker.com. Listen to all those previous episodes and subscribe and be notified when new ones come out. So again, thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy this episode, and we look forward to speaking with you all in future episodes. Welcome back, Brandt and Alex. Thanks for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
You bet. And as we mentioned in the introduction, we're talking about some of the changes coming up in 2019. And I know you guys are going to be talking about this subject even in a little more detail in a webinar that you are going to host in late January. But what we're talking about is some of the changes that CMS released as relates to coding and reimbursement, specifically on the E&M side. And what we wanted to do is just have kind of a quick conversation, but get some feedback on maybe big picture, what this means, what our clients, our audience can be thinking about in terms of what to expect as these changes come into play, and what some of the timing issues we may be dealing with here so that they can start planning for it. So I don't know, maybe Brandt, if you want to just jump in and talk big picture about what some of these changes are, and then maybe I'll let you guys just talk about what are some of the things we should be expecting or looking for in 19.
Sure. Thanks. I think, first and foremost, I view this as a somewhat positive directional message from CMS, maybe a very positive message from them, depending on what seat you're in, that we're recognizing providers don't have time to do everything that we expect them to do in or out of the exam room every day. And the more we want higher productivity with less amount of available hours, and then we try to cram more documentation, more outside work into that visit. We've been hearing for years now in our work that I don't have time and there's no way I could be more productive with all the stuff that comes in addition. And so this to me seems to acknowledge that and say, look, we're trying to simplify it. We're trying to give you a way to most effectively care for the patient and document that you've cared for the patient without it being overly burdensome. In the same vein, I think they've addressed some of the issues around telehealth and quality where they're trying to simplify, reduce, and let providers care for their patients in the format and in the space and time that patients want to seek that treatment. So I think, very positive message all around. With any change like this, obviously, there's going to be another layer of complexity that now providers have to figure out. And to be honest, a lot of providers are already confused about what the documentation guidelines are and what, coding entails in general. And our clients run the gamut of providers knowing how to code, not knowing how to code, who does it for them, with them, et cetera. And auditing is an entirely different conversation. So I think there's a lot of operational work to go in behind this to actually make it effective. But I was encouraged to see some of the changes come through. It is just CMS, they're the largest and they usually set the tone. But given the time frame that's rolled out, no one has to has to jump tomorrow to capitalize. But I do think that there's a sense of opportunity cost on this as well, where the sooner you figure it out and start taking advantage of some of the increase, you could be in a better seat.
Yeah. And with any rule that comes out, it's just going to be one more thing to figure out. Mm-hmm. But to your earlier point, the administration is showing us that they're trying to simplify documentation. We're seeing that as, that's what the rule entails for a large part on the E&M side. But also on the physician fee schedule, there's a lot to unpack in this rule. Right. And I know we'll get into a lot more of that in our January webinar. But for the specific physician fee schedule changes, I think of three things, two of which directly support your comment on trying to simplify documentation, ease the administrative burden on the role of the provider. And so we see that on the E&M documentation guidelines, trying to simplify what's required of them, giving the ancillary, the support staff, more of a role to document those procedures, things in the medical record that they can then just go in and validate. Mm-hmm. Three main things in my mind on the physician fee schedule. The second of which is they're trying to modernize reimbursement to keep up with technology, specifically in the telehealth space. And the virtual check-in rule that they're doing is now reimbursing providers for things that they previously just would have done. There's administrative burden that went into that. And now they're trying to give some level of compensation for those types of tasks. So again, trying to streamline and simplify some of the tasks that are at least reimburse, compensate for things that they would have been having to do.
Alex, do you think on that one piece about the maybe increased emphasis or openness towards telehealth, is this kind of, we've seen this in the past, and I realize this is going to be speculation, but do you think this is kind of an initial entree into maybe what could be in the future true reimbursement or reimbursement and expansion of reimbursement opportunities for true telehealth encounters? Or is this kind of what we can expect for a while? What are your thoughts?
This is showing us that some big changes from the administration's mindset. Previously, they have really stressed face-to-face patient interaction.
Right.
And now, by developing some of these new HIPAA codes, there's G codes now where the provider can listen to a pre-recorded message from a patient and get compensated for that. They don't have to see that patient face to face. They can listen to that to determine does that patient need an office visit. I think what this is showing us is that the administration recognizes that there's modernization happening in technology, and we've got to reimburse and compensate these providers for other ways of seeing these patients and handling these clinical activities,
which I think has been proven readily that are legitimate. I know, 10 years ago when people started talking about telemedicine, that was a big concern. Are these going to be legitimate encounters? Is it safe? Can you validate quality and ensure quality still in that type of environment? It sounds like we've gotten over a big hump there.
That's a good point, because there's good actors and bad actors, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so the thought is, we'll get in more on the E&M side, the less importance maybe for coding audits that we may have from a Medicare perspective. But, how will people leverage these new HIPAA codes on the telehealth side is still going to be subject to audits. And we're still it's yet to be determined, how effectively people use these guidelines, these new codes.
There'll still be standards.
Following the bell curve.
Yeah, that's right.
I do think that the telehealth provisions, as well as the reduction or consolidation of quality measures, are all indicators, again, of CMS's dedication to more efficient population health management. So as we see these, not just single health system clinically integrated networks, but multi-state, national, massive provider networks that are trying to lower the cost of care. And we've worked with some and seen the scope be completely dependent on their ability to treat patients across state borders, on their ability to treat patients remotely, or find expertise in areas that may not reside in a local regional hospital setting. And so I think this doesn't fix all that, but to me, it looks like an acknowledgement on CMS's part that if population health is going to be successful, we need to pool our national resources around how we provide care to our national population to actually drive down the cost, and giving systems the opportunity to make those decisions will empower that as opposed to restricting it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what I saw in the rule that really speaks to that is within that modernization aspect of things. These new CPT codes allow another form of reimbursement that the patient has to acknowledge, but it coordinates care because it is incentivizing now these physicians, the physician of record, and then the specialist maybe down the road, trading notes about a patient and getting reimbursed for that.
Which absolutely has a quality component to it, obviously, and as well as a population health piece as well. One of the things, Brandt, you mentioned was, or kind of reference to earlier, was the fact that these new rules and these changes are coming down from CMS. So maybe just comment briefly on what that means for everybody else, not meaning non-CMS related encounters and Medicare beneficiaries, but also in light of the operational things that have to be taken in consideration as a result of these changes, what are some things maybe that groups and hospitals can be thinking about down the road as they are thinking about, okay, well, it's CMS today, but what's it going to look like down the road?
Right. We've had some good recent experience with this as we rolled out ACOs and the Pioneer MSSP programs and everything a few years ago. There's usually from CMS a shot over the bow, a lot of reaction to that, then a very soft initial implementation. We always used to refer to the carrot first before the stick, right? Sure. We're in carrot mode, I think, right here, where there's some additional incentive to go ahead and be proactive and really get engaged around the changes, both on the E&M side, the telehealth side, the quality side, and some others within this rule. But at the end of the day, this is just CMS right now. And until we get to 2021 and these, the consolidation of E&M codes, takes hold as proposed, there's not going to be, I think, the kind of backlash or impact financially that everyone was worried about when this was announced. Now, commercial payers and others, do follow suit in their own time, and this usually is an indicator of things to come. But like I said when we started, I don't think there's an immediate or an urgent burning platform for providers and provider groups to change everything about the way they're coding. But if they don't, eventually it will be to their financial detriment with CMS and probably with others years down the line. So
it's the carrot today, but if it's the carrot today, then we should expect the stick will come.
Right. But the carrot today, there's the upside. So, you're not only delaying your problem and putting yourself at potential increase or reduced reimbursement later, but you're also missing out on this opportunity to increase reimbursement in a time where margins are tight and everyone's worried about how they're going to squeeze every last. So you got a little window out for some value opportunity there, right?
And we will see them implement some of these changes, I think. But, as evidenced by how macro was rolled out, is we thought that there was going to be this firm and fast program that was coming out and these stiff regulations on day one. And what we saw was they used these rulemaking periods to ease regulations, promote adoption, promote participation in the program. And I'm kind of using that lesson and applying that to this E&M proposal that came out.
Sure.
When the proposal came out, we thought it was going to be a complete overhaul, and it's a wonderful thing. Everybody's excited about the relaxed documentation guidelines that accompany with the E&M, but the fear that reimbursement was going to change as a result of that, we were going to collapse the codes. Well, CMS heard that that concern, and like we've seen in other examples, they delayed that financial ramification until 2021. And why that's important is because the longer away that is, the more time there is for advocacy for groups that have an agenda or want to advocate for a certain position on that. We've seen that CMS will listen to a degree. Now they want to move in this direction. They want to implement some of these changes, but just because today it says 2021, we may see some future rulemaking that softens that eases that to a degree further.
Well, maybe reiterate that for me if you can, because you mentioned or you referenced or we talked about 2019, but you also referenced 2021 and the financial ramifications. Can you walk through that again real quick in terms of what is the rule right now as it's being proposed on some of those timing? What does 2021 mean, I guess?
So the proposal came out that for these E&M office codes, I think level 1 through level 5, new and established visits mostly, that today we have a payment for each of those codes. And what this final rule ended up doing was it eased documentation requirements. But the financial ramifications where they proposed to collapse those codes and do away with level 2 through level 4 and just have, that code, one code for level 2 through level 4 and a level 5, that's now been delayed until 2021. That received a lot of consternation from medical professionals because you've got to be familiar with your coding bell curve. And if I'm coding more level 4s, then that's going to have a negative financial impact on me. Well, now because that's been delayed, we get to do a little bit more time for our analysis and understand what type of financial impact is going to befall upon me in my medical practice.
Yeah. So it seems very rational. And to your point, it gives a little bit of a window for them to make some adjustments on the final, whatever the final rule and determination ends up being.
And at the least, this is a call to action from CMS, which I think will be echoed certainly by commercial payers and others, that we want physicians and providers to know what they're putting in these charts, to know clearly what they're documenting, and for them to understand it just like the patients can understand it. This transparency in pricing and how the system works. We're trying to simplify and consolidate, but providers have different coding habits. And so some just always go with a 3 or a 4 based on their level of comfort. That's why we do coding audits and always find opportunity and variance. And so there's going to be a lot of that over the next few years. It's a good time to be a coder. The bad news is you got to learn new things, but the good news is that it's in high demand because you've got to sort this out. Yeah. And it's been an issue for a long time, but just operationally bread and butter. We've seen, groups outsource their coding, then bring it back in-house. Then they put it back in the actual clinic setting. Then they pull it back into a central resource. And so no one has figured out exactly the silver bullet across the board, but organizations are figuring out what works for them based on their size, their provider type, specialties, et cetera. Sure. And I think that energy and that need for clarity is going to increase here in the next 24 months, especially now that there are dollars attached to figuring it out as opposed to just compliance and potential reductions in reimbursement.
Yeah, CMS knows that that's another way to trigger or really move that needle along too, for sure.
When you mentioned the transparency, it made me think of like something else I wanted to address and what we saw in the final rule that came out, and that is we'll get deeper into the conversion factor changes in our January webinar, but CMS is updating the conversion factors in RVU formula, work RVUs, malpractice RVUs, and practice expense RVUs. And they also have said that they will have a market research firm go through and update those practice expense RVUs, which will play a factor into the conversion factor for upcoming years. The practice expense predominantly made up of, or a lot of it is made up by supplies and equipment expenses associated with running a practice. Well, now we're going to have a little bit more transparency, a little bit more real data to support what's feeding that practice expense on the provider side.
This has been really helpful. Again, as I mentioned in the introduction, you guys are going to be presenting on this specifically in more detail in a webinar. Again, that's going to be on January 24th at 2 p.m. The information and links on where to register, how to register for that webinar will be in the show notes for this episode. So make sure people, for those that are interested in learning more about this and hearing more, particularly as it comes out here in early January, then Alex and Brandt will be talking more. But other than that, I really appreciate you guys coming on and giving us kind of a high level perspective on this. And I know our clients are very interested in hearing more, learning more about how to kind of get themselves and their mindset prepared for what's coming down the pipe here. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the time. Yeah.
Thank
we look
you.
forward to chatting again soon.
You bet.